Afternoon, everyone. My name is Chetan Chishra. I'm partner with risk optimization team at Grant Thornton and largely focusing on real estate as a sector. Before we start our today's topic, I'll just take a minute to do an introduction. Largely, we are at the cusp of a digital revolution in real estate sector and the ecosystem. While in past, uh, the overall larger initiatives are focusing on CRM or support functions. But now, as we speak, this is largely gaining depth, and the use of modern technology has extended to the other important pillars in the real estate as well. Today, along with my colleague partners, we will be deliberating on data privacy and cyber resilience in this digital age and what we should be focusing on as a sector. To facilitate today's session, I have my colleague partners Rohit Das, who focuses on cyber advisory, Kush Wadhwa, partner in cyber advisory and crisis resilience with a specialization on incident response, and Shankar Krishnamurthy, partner crisis and resilience with a focus on real estate. Over to our experts, Rohit Das and Kush, to talk about the content and the DPDP and privacy, and then we can take up some of the questions and the panel discussions with our esteemed panelists.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Chetan, and really a pleasure to be connected with each one of you. Maybe just to quickly set the context in terms of DPDPA, our country, India, has been going through a lot of data handling, data governance, and I would call it digital transformation in the larger context. And just want to quote our Honorable Prime Minister, Shri Narendra Modi ji. He very clearly quoted that this is our decade. So we call it a decade where we are going and bolstering the growth of the economy in a large segment by usage of digital, by usage of technology, by usage of AI and other aspects. And just to quote one of the statements that he mentioned in the AI summit, that with the usage of data and AI, India is going to bolster the growth to the overall economy by more than $10 trillion to India's GDP by 2030. So it's a large, heavy duty usage of data, and henceforth for India to be really sustaining that level of governance, we need to have a very proper and a very good framework, which is what the PDPA is probably trying to address in a larger scheme of things. So with that, we would want to very clearly talk about what are the nuances of DPDPA, why DPDPA at this point in time, and then how DPDPA is going to transform real estate as a sector, and what do we need to do as organizations, individuals, and country by large to ensure that we are all part of the journey, but at the same time we are embracing data privacy as a culture change, which we'll all have to adopt as we speak. If you can just go to the next slide. Quickly, just introducing some of the key aspects and terminologies that all of you on this call would need to be sort of familiar with. First and foremost is that DPDPA stands for digital personal data. Henceforth, we are talking only digital data, any data which is in the digital context, digitized, any analog data, paper form of data, eventually photographed or scanned or eventually digitized, also sort of forms part of DPDPA. We are talking about personal data handling. We are not talking about any other data here. We are not talking about company sensitive information, etc. We are only talking about personal data. So that's the broad scheme of things that we will be looking at when we are talking DPDPA. Now, who does it really apply to when it comes to real estate? Does it really apply to organizations who are only processing data in India, or is it for any personal information which gets processed even despite the jurisdiction, country, and so on and so forth? So the idea is that for any organization or any fiduciary or any system or a forum which is processing goods and services to India as a jurisdiction or Indian citizens, residents, etc., then it becomes applicable, irrespective of the jurisdiction or geography where it gets processed. So that's one aspect that one needs to be really thinking through. So when it comes to, I'll just give an example of, let's say, a global real estate organization, if they process data within India, but not of Indian citizens, it belongs to US citizens or European citizens, but the processing is happening in Indian soil, it is very much applicable. So that's the applicability bit when it comes to, DPDPA. Now, some of the key stakeholders who are getting involved here. The most important terminology a lot of you would have gotten familiar with is the word fiduciary, right? Fiduciary is that organization or that individual or set of organization or that set of individuals who are defining the purpose of data collection, the personal data collection. Who's defining the purpose? They are called the fiduciaries. And there is another terminology which is called significant data fiduciary, right? Any organization which is processing personal information in a large volume or sensitive personal information, that belongs to significant data fiduciaries. For example, any real estate organization, if they have heavy duty, huge, massive information, legacy information from multiple, decades, and they are processing it for certain marketing campaigns and so on and so forth, they should really consider of thinking of themselves as a significant data fiduciary. But to ease in it, large BPOs, KPOs, large banks, NBFCs, and any ITS tech organizations by default qualifies as significant data fiduciary. When it comes to the next terminology, which is processor, right? So any of your third-party processors like a payroll service provider or a cloud service provider, or for that matter, your CRM or any other facility vendors, etc. These are all processors for a real estate context. Consent manager is something that I'll come to eventually later, but data principal. So any individual whose data needs to be protected. For example, myself, yourself, all of us on the call, we are all citizens or residents, etc. So we are called data principals in this context. Data Protection Board of India is that quasi-judicial body or so-called, we couldn't call it regulator. It's not a regulator per se. It's basically an adjudicator who eventually governs the law within the country. So any questions, queries, etc., that any individual may have, they have to report or put their grievances towards Data Protection Board. So they are going to govern this across the country. Then I'm talking about data protection officer. Data protection officer is that person or that group, that office which is responsible to communicate anything related to the governance of data protection of a organization or a fiduciary to the outside world. Could be law enforcement agencies, data protection board, or any other individuals or customers, and so on and so forth. And they are also responsible to drive the entire data protection initiative within the organization. Appellate Tribunal or TDSAT is basically one level above Data Protection Board. Let's say you are not satisfied with certain discussions, agreement, or maybe thoughts from the Data Protection Board, you have very well an option to go one step ahead, which is the TDSAT. You can visualize like a High Court and a Supreme Court's kind of an arrangement. Last but not the least is the consent manager, which is one of the bold moves that India as a country has taken. No other data protection law within any of the jurisdiction talks about consent management per se. This is basically to ease in the entire overheads of any fiduciary or large real estate organization or any other organization for that matter to manage the consents of their customers. Right. So if they are heavy duty consent, requests, change of consents, nomination changes, any KYC detail changes, etc., it becomes very difficult because it has to be maintained right all the times. Sometimes consent withdrawal comes to your organization. So all of that to manage it, in a very easy and concise form, consent manager concept is introduced. Consent manager is an external intermediary or an organization which will fall in between a data principal and a fiduciary, and who will ensure that the entire management of consent is seamless across. So these are some of the key stakeholders which all of you should be familiar with. The entire act is revolving around the data principal rights, which are what you see in the middle section, which is basically right to access of information, to erasure of information, ensuring quality of the information to be right all the time, which is a correction of any KYC details, etc. In case of any, God forbid, situations of incapacitation or death or anything of that sort, you have all the right to nominate your data to somebody else, and you have all the right to withdraw your consent from any other areas where you are probably not consented to. And then, of course, last but not the least, to right to grievance redressal, which is these are the six rights that the entire DPDPA is revolving around. On the left side, you would find data privacy principles. So there are 7 principles which we typically call as data uh, uh, commonly accepted privacy principles, right? So you would have heard about the GAAP in financial terms. CFOs would, all of the finance background would already have heard about generally accepted accounting principles. Similar to that, this is generally accepted privacy principles. All of these are lawfulness, fairness, transparency. So whenever your data collection happens, it is lawful in nature, it's fair, it's transparent, very clearly talks about what information is being collected for what purpose. It is limited to a purpose. If you're taking a data for, let's say, any particular marketing campaign, etc., you can't use it beyond that. So only for that purpose it has to be used. The third one is data minimization. So generally in real estate, and of course real estate being a lot of being unorganized within the country, you would find heavy duty information collection happening, right? So if a lot of information gets collected in various size, shape or form, the natural tendency for India organizations are to collect maximum information, and they really don't think about what do they use that information for, which is against the principles of DPDPA. It's called data minimization. What the real reasons of why the principle has been applied is, God forbid tomorrow a cyber attack happens, which my colleague Kush is going to talk about. You really don't have any purpose by which you have held that information, which you should not have held with in the first place. So that's the concept of data minimization. Then accuracy of information, then storage limitation, storing it for the required purposes, for required duration, ensuring that the retention happens for that period of time. And there is a mandate that you should store all the logs for at least a period of 1 year. The other storage limitations can be linked to RERA. RERA at the moment doesn't really talk about any particular duration, but as depending on the organization, etc., they can, as long as they are meeting the statute obligations and others, they can store the data for whatever time they need to have access to that information. The purpose has to be met, right? And last but not the least is the accountability. You need to have a proper governance structure set up within the organization. You should have a data protection officer or a representative and the entire office who will govern this across the organization. So these are the just context setting slide. Maybe Eva can just go to the next slide. Some of the privacy touch points, I already touched upon some of these, but just to quickly glimpse, when you are a home buyer or a tenant data, so you would find your data getting collected at the booking offices, your KYC records being collected, your payment and financing data all being collected. In the process of lead and marketing data, you would find inquiry data, site details, digital tracking data. All of these are various touch points in your various stages of involvement that you may have. And interesting that thing that you would notice in real estate per se, you would find multiple third parties, fourth parties, vendors, suppliers, etc., getting involved, including your brokers and others, right? So from that standpoint, the collection touch points are multiple. How do you really govern this is basically one of the key challenges that we will talk about. Maybe we can go to the next slide. Some of the gray areas we wanted to touch upon quickly, cover first of all, information when it comes to broker data and processor data. These are all data touch points where there is no clear cut idea of who is owning the information, right? So the DPDPA Act revolves around fiduciary being questioned, challenged, etc. So what about data processors, right? So agents most of the time on behalf of the fiduciaries collect information, but at the same time, if they are defining the purpose, please understand the agents themselves qualify as a fiduciary. Then, when it comes to significant data fiduciaries, at the moment, Data Protection Board has not really clearly called out the thresholds of what threshold beyond which the volume, if it hits, they qualify as a significant data fiduciary. That remains as a gray area. When it comes to some of these data, when it comes collection points, touch points, when you visit any facility or when you visit any sales launches, etc., your data is getting collected in various shape and form. And even if you look at some of these lead lists, etc., which get shared across multiple marketing agencies, etc., they're all in a very unorganized segment. So if you look at it from that perspective, the consents are not taken in an appropriate fashion, they're not recorded correctly. So the first touch point for any customer like me, if I were to buy a property or a real estate commercial land, I would really want, first, if I approach real estate agent or developer, I would first want to understand what information they need really for the processing, and at the same time, who will they share this information with, right? Because tomorrow that information gets leaked, this information where it initially got touched, that fiduciary will be held accountable for. So henceforth, it is important to control the information flow within, which we will see as we proceed, because right now it's very unorganized, but eventually it will get structured as we speak. Now, some of these contract data, so these are all areas where you would find that the contractor information, because there are multiple subcontractors, third parties, fourth parties, etc., getting involved. There are multiple layers within the real estate segment per se. Henceforth, who's really accountable is something that we would have a challenge to talk about. So I think these are some of the key challenges. Now, holding on to challenges, we have something that we have to really look forward to from a overall incident perspective. So I'll probably request my colleague Kush to come now and talk about some of the key areas when it comes to incident response, and what are the fines associated with it. What should really organization really consider from that perspective? Over to you, Kush.
Thanks, Rohit. I think it was very beautifully laid out about the DPDP, what are the nuances around it. But the most important thing and the center to which this law revolves around is the incident management. One thing is absolutely clear that if you are not prepared for the DPDP, the Data Privacy Board is not going to come and slap you a fine of 250 CR, which the market perception is. But absolutely, if you happen to be a victim of a cyber attack and there is an obligation to report to Data Privacy Board. When it comes to Data Privacy Board, they are absolutely going to look about your preparedness on how you have handled. If I can request for the next slide before even I start talking about it. Thank you. So before when it comes to the Data Privacy Board, they are definitely going to go deep down the rabbit hole to understand your readiness around the logs, around how the data was preserved, data in rest and data in motion, whether it was encrypted or not. All those parameters will be assessed. And that is when the companies, the organizations will get exposed around DPDP preparedness. And that is why everyone is going around the gap assessment on the DPDP side. Now, the fines are huge, but it is not that, it's only the 250 CR. 250 CR is on the data fiduciary. If you see the bottom right table, 250 CR is for the non-compliance by data fiduciary, which is absolutely across the industries. This is going to be there if the data fiduciary has not been able to meet his, the responsibilities as per the DPDPA Act. Absolutely, the fine is 250 CR. Then there is a fine of children data violations, which is 200 CR. If you are preserving child data, which is the minor data, which is less than 18 years, the fine is up to 200 CR. The third one is the most critical, and why I say is the most critical, because a lot of organizations where I go and do the investigation on the cyber breach, on the network attack or the ransomware attack, they feel that they don't have any obligation to report to certain, for now it is certain, or to the SEBI or to the stock exchanges. but absolutely as the law of the country, it is mandatory to report. There is an obligation by the enterprises to report to them, because if they don't and the attacker happens to post the exfiltrated data on the dark web, they will anyways be exposed, and these regulators or the watchdogs of the country will get to know about that the company has been breached. And if at later stage it came to notice to these watchdogs or the regulators that they didn't disclose it, it's calling for a much bigger problem. Right now, it is still okay. I mean, SEBI and certain will not go as aggressive as what the Data Privacy Board is expected to go. And if there is a breach notification failure, companies will go for a fine up to 200 CR, which is a huge penalty. And DPDP is becoming more and more critical just because of the sheer amount of fines that are being imposed because of failure of the responsibilities in terms of being compliant, in terms of notification about the breach, so on and so forth. Real estate is definitely not categorized as significant data fiduciary, as what my colleague Rohit has talked about the difference between the data fiduciary and significant data fiduciary. But yes, for the other industries where we assist our clients, the SDF obligation, if unmet, there is a fine up to 150 CR. Miscellaneous non-compliance is 50 CR. But yes, there is also a fine on the data principal duties breach, which is up to 10,000 rupees. But data principal data breach is 10,000 rupees, but data principal is only one individual. Multiplied by the volume of the data principals that we are talking about, that fine is in itself a huge fine that will come into action. Now, we absolutely, what I have seen is market perceives incident response or incident management as a reactive service, and they say that they are not concerned about incident happening out, and there is no requirement for them to be prepared, because if it happens, then only DPDP incident management will come into action. But that's not true. Definitely, there is a preparedness that is required to be done by the enterprises, and if it is not done, there is a problem, and DPP is definitely going to ask not many questions. In fact, RBI and SEBI have made RBI and IRDI have made a mandate for the BFSI sector to have a DFIR preparedness assessment done and have a retainership signed by the consulting firm one like ours, where the incident responders and the services are there just in case something goes wrong. There is someone to help them out to understand what exactly happened and how to control the impact of the network attack. And if there is no preparedness, absolutely there are financial penalties. Forget about the loss because of the damage that will be caused by the perpetrator or the attacker. Definitely when the attacker gets into the network, the idea is to make money out of it. Either it is through a financial gain or through getting the data exfiltrated, which will be sold in the dark web, or it will be used as a ransom to extort money from the enterprises. So the fine is one thing, but absolutely if you are not prepared on the incident side, the logs are not there, and if it's a dead end for the incident responders, absolutely it's a problem. I'll give you a perfect example. So let's say you have a network breach where the attacker came into the network. On the AWS cloud, there has been a movement of data from S3 bucket. Just for my fellow audience, I know they are technical and they know about S3, but S3 is more like a storage space where the AWS gives the space to the user to store the data. Now, if there is a movement of data from S3 bucket, data is moved out, there is a cost that is attached to it, and it will be shown as a spike on your billing sheet. First thing first, the compliance team should definitely be monitoring those billing sheets. I have seen clients where the normal bill that they are paying is $100, but then there is a spike of $2,000 in 1 month, and no one even looked around why the spike is from $100 or $150 to $2,000. So one should definitely look for the spike in the billing. Now, if there are no logs that are enabled, you will not get to know what data has been exfiltrated. And this is not real-time monitoring that someone is doing. One will get to know after 15 days or a month's time when they happen to see that, okay, there has been a breach, there has been a spike in billing sheet, and we need to understand what data went out. So absolutely, the log needs to be preserved. VPC flow logs, absolutely, they need to be preserved so that one can get to know what folder files were exfiltrated and to what IP address the data has been exfiltrated. If it is a very sensitive data, I have seen my clients going to a level where they have filed a complaint, they hired a law firm, they went to an Interpol, Interpol went to the FBI, and from the FBI, they went to the VPN service providers, which was used by the attacker to attack their network, and that individual was behind the bars. I have seen those cases as well. So absolutely, it's an enterprise call whether they want to go deep down the rabbit hole or not. But that's the secondary point. But the first thing is absolutely we need to have the logs in place so that if there is any legal proceeding that needs to be done can be done well in time. Then there are regulatory actions which we spoke about. Legal risks, absolutely. If the customer's data gets out, there are lawsuits. There is definitely a risk of lawsuits by these individuals, and I have seen those happening even in India, not only abroad, but in India as well. The customers are getting very serious about their personal data. So I've seen that reputational damage. Not to even talk about it, the confidence level of the customers is shaken if the data goes out. And also it depends on what is the preparedness that the organization had, what is the comfort level that the enterprise was able to give to the individual, that despite this controls happening or in place, the data was gone out. And if there are no controls, absolutely it puts in a very bad light to these customers or the clients. Operational disruption, everything comes to a standstill. The network is down. I have worked on incidents where the client was of financial services. Definitely, the business disruption was for a week, and they lost almost 100 crores in a week. So absolutely, it's a disruption and a financial loss to the organization. Strategic impact, competitive advantage is lost, then market credibility is lost, and in real estate sectors, because there are so many data touch points, data becomes really important, and that's why there is a strategic impact as well. Definitely, there have been geographical hotspots of cyber attacks in India, but what we have seen is Town B, Town C are getting more impacted now. Town A, the impact that is causing month on month is more in Town B and Town C. Town A, it's the same. But yes, if you talk about Surat, Bengaluru, Tamil Nadu, Chennai, Telangana, Jaipur, the impact is huge, and the cost associated is increasing many folds month on month. When I started my career in 2006, there were hardly any cyber incidents and there was no seriousness around it. But what I've seen in the last 2-3 years, this has elevated to next level. And what I'm really worried about is what is getting ahead of us, or what is that coming our way in the next 1 year. Forget about the next 2-3 years. So absolutely, incident response preparedness is must and lies at the center of DPDPA Act. Next slide, we'll try to cover ASAP. I know we are running in short of time. The benefit of having the incident response preparedness is definitely there. It's rapid. You have the logs on day one itself. The incident responder comes and start looking for what went wrong. There is a forensic readiness. We know what devices to be imaged, how to image. It's not that the enterprises just wipe out because something goes wrong, which I've seen happening in the last, when I was to talk about 2015 to 20, I saw that happening. But now the clients are getting more educated. They preserve those devices. Business continuity, because incident response preparedness also talks about how the business will continue just in case of a black swan event. The companies are prepared. They know what will be the communication channel just in case emails are disrupted or the chat communications are disrupted. They know how to continue the business. Specialist support, the most critical aspect, because every country is falling short of incident responders. In India, there is a dearth requirement of incident responders. There are a handful of them, and if you don't have a specialist by your side when something goes wrong, and absolutely you cannot be negotiating at the last minute, it has to be done beforehand. The retainership needs to be signed so that if something goes wrong, the incident responder comes and helps you to come out of the crisis situation. Regulatory readiness, absolutely, because the regulators are going to ask about what was your readiness about the incident response. So these are some of the key points around incident response preparedness, but this is becoming more and more critical, especially with the regulators going heavy and with the DPDP coming into picture. We are seeing a lot more traction on the incident response preparedness on the proactive side rather than on the reactive side. That's from my side, but happy to take any questions that may have. But passing on to Rohit again for covering the last slide.
Yeah. Thanks, Kush. Maybe just to quickly spend a minute on the overall roadmap. Eva, if you can just go to the next slide. So any real estate organization or enterprise, I think, or fiduciary for that matter, I think some of these steps that you see on the screen is what you need to follow. I'll just probably summarize overall for everyone's perspective. I think first starting point is to know where you are, right? So most importantly, to do a current state assessment, or we call it gap assessment, whatever you do. And as part of the gap assessment, please do assess your current inventory, do a data discovery exercise of understanding what kind of data you hold, what PII, personal information you hold in what systems, what are your legacy systems, etc. Second part to it is to also understand your interlinkages with your third parties, fourth parties, ecosystem. We call it extended enterprises by large. So what kind of agreements have you really signed up for? Now, after doing all of that, second aspect is to set up the future, right? So your areas which you will need to design for future is going to be first in terms of setting up of governance, setting up a DPO organization, your office, your department heads who are responsible for privacy as a whole, call it privacy champions by large. Second is going to be in terms of all the policies, procedures, and other documentation, privacy notices, contractual agreements, calling it in a bucket of documentation, right? That needs to be ready. The third aspect is the legal bit, that all of these documentation which needs a legal understanding has to be checked with your general counsel, or you need a law firm support, which Kush talked about. Please do that. I think that's the third element. Fourth is going to be about tech. What kind of technology you already have. You may have an SAP, you may be having an ERP or HRMS, etc. How do you fine tune to be compliant to DPDPA? The fifth is going to be about tech investments. You may have to invest in certain technologies. You may have to invest in a data discovery tool. You may have to invest in a consent management platform, and so on and so forth. That's the tech investment bit that you will need to look at. The second last bit, or the penultimate bit, is going to be about some of these during your entire workflow or the business flow of a typical real estate business. You would find some of these customer touch points, etc., where data gets collected in a very different way, or it has to be redesigned. So we call it business process re-engineering. You need to re-engineer the process in itself to ensure that the DPDPA is met. That's the sixth bit. And last and most important bit is going to be incident response. God forbid an incident happens, how do you really react to it? That is what Kush talked about. So I think these are the core elements that you need to look at. But what you see on the screen is the sequence of events that you need to apply. That's all I had. Back to you, Chetan.
Sure. Thank you, Rohit and Kush. And largely what we understood, that DPDPA is actually not a rocket science to be looked at, but a methodical approach to be followed on how do we make sure that we are ready for it, and how do we make sure that we have implemented it in the right spirit. Yes, there are certain gray areas. There are areas where when the framework was also set up, was slightly unclear as to how do we address those some of these questions. And to address these, we have Shankar, who was moderating a panel for some of the questions, and the questions which are there on the chat as well. We will I'll hand it over to Shankar to moderate some of these questions and the challenges which most of the companies have been facing around DPDPA. Over to you, Shankar.
I'm sure it has been very insightful for all of us who have joined this webinar. It's not very easy for us to get all of our specialists like Kush, Rohit, and Chetan together in one room. So I'm going to take this opportunity, like Chetan said, to put them on the spot, so to say, to understand certain nuances which is relevant to the audience that we have. So I'll start with Chetan, pulling you back in. Everybody has been talking about digital transformation. It has been a topic across industries and even in real estate. What will be different now in terms of what we have seen with DPDPA and incident that Rohit and Kush spoke about? What has changed now?
So Shankar, historically, if we look at digitalization, or to say technology, has largely been a support function in real estate. Our support function and technology has been the backbone for institutionalizing the support functions, whether we use modern technologies like RPAs, we use OCR, and that has been largely the case for real estate as well. While consumer organization or D2C have been very, very technology forward, that was not the case to a very large extent with real estate. But right now, the data that is there in the real estate, the emergence of prop tech, the emergence of CRM, automated solutions around call centers have actually brought a lot of data driven decision making and integrated decision making within the organization. And with this, we have also come in with significant amount of risk around privacy, around customer journeys. How do we protect that data? Around cyber threats, how do we monitor? All of that is something which is very, very relevant and is the talk of the town as far as the boardrooms are concerned. So currently, CIOs are not only responsible for ensuring a technology is placed well, adopted well, but technology is supported well in terms of security protocols, incident protocols, and the overall transformation. So that's how the transformation has to be looked into, not only from an adoption and innovation in the technology, but how do we govern those technology with specific guardrails around it.
Understood. Perfect. And moving on to sort of pulling in Kush back again. Kush, we have always talked about cyber risk. Maybe you could help us understand a little bit for the audience in terms of some of the key cyber risks that you have seen. And also picking up from one of the questions in the chat, what can organizations do to be prepared for a cyber?
So see, it's not a rocket science. I have seen people talking about cloud mythos, all that fancy stuff. But if I was to see about how the market is going for the securing the organization, they are not even concerned about rotating the AWS keys. The situation is that poor, and I am a firm believer that a lot of investment is not going to secure your network. It is how the solutions are configured. What is your governance around it? The organizations talk a lot more about creating the policies, procedures, have a very tech team. But what is the governance? What is the enforcement of those policies, procedures? I think that is very, very critical. The second is for the CIOs and the CISOs, the biggest worry right now is definitely the increase of the digital landscape, the data sources that they have, the access of those data sources. It is not only confined to internal employees. It is, I think, the external people, external vendors, OEMs have more access to the data these days than the insider ones, right? That needs to be governed, that needs to be controlled. The API key is going in a wild. I can bet you with all hands on my heart, I'm telling you, lot many audience will agree they don't know, they have no control, or they have very limited control on the APIs that are going around. And as an incident responder, 75% of the attacks that I have seen is because of the control issues on the APIs. How are the APIs secured, or are they vulnerable? Are they are they dropping down the APIs which are not required, so on and so forth. I think those are the ones. Then the second is as simple as what I talked about on the preparedness side, right? Everyone is focused on business, which I think is really important, because there's so much of pressures on the CXOs from the business unit heads that they have to conduct the business. And I'll give you a perfect example. Last 3 weeks, I've been investigating one of the very large network attack, which I happened to safeguard the client because we just responded well in time. The amount of pressure that was there on the CRO to up the servers was next level. And I said, okay, let's call up the business unit heads to this war room and tell them that we are happy to switch on our power on these servers, but the risk is on you. The CRO is not going to take it because CRO is doing whatever is best and to her abilities, and she's bringing in the experts. But business unit heads have to understand that there will be disruption, but that disruption is for good. Because if the house is not in order and you are still wanting to conduct the business, it's going to take you to the next level. And I'll give you the repercussions around it. To the level where IB, Intelligence Bureau of the country, has started going into these incident cases, because if data of the citizens is getting leaked and it's going in the hands of the Chinese attackers or to the North Korean attackers, it's a matter of concern for the country. This is not limited only to one organization. It is a national security issue. And I have seen in 3 instances where IB has knocked the doors and they were standing right there to give the details of what exactly happened. So I think those are the cyber risks that are there, which enterprise should look at, and nothing fancy, but just the governance around it and technology, whatever they have, it needs to be configured properly. And Shankar, you had one follow-up question. If you can repeat.
Yeah.
If you can repeat.
Yeah. So the other question, I think organizations, I think you answered it, Kush. How can they prepare for the cyber attacks? But I think one interesting one, Kush, I have got in the chat box now is, what are the points to consider in choosing a partner to look at cyber response? I think that's something.
No, absolutely. It is very, very simple. As you will go for to find out whether it's Mercedes, which is good, or a BMW. The same goes here as well. Definitely in the CIO world, it's a word of mouth. Absolutely, one is happy that it goes there. But just in case if someone is not able to figure out, ask for the CVs of the individuals who will be working on incident response case. Rookies cannot be working on such cases, which I have seen, and they have fall flat. They have made the enterprises go down south. So the named individuals who are going to work on on that specific incident, it should not be that, okay, in the proposal we give one name, but on the ground it's someone else who is working on it. And I would say at least 3 to 4 years, bare minimum of incident response experience to the analyst who is going to work on it is someone you should absolutely go for. That consulting firm is the one you should choose. Yeah.
And Shankar, if I may add on to what Kush was saying in terms of readiness of organization, what we have actually come across on as basic as the call center protocols, which is Exotel of the world, which are being used, people are largely unaware how their data is being used by the outsource agencies like call centers.
Absolutely.
The API, the enablement of data downloads, we are not even aware on how, with the ease of doing business, how these APIs are actually being a challenge as far as data privacy concepts are concerned. So the idea is, and Rohit had very well laid out, that the first point to do is to look at your data discovery, do that touch points of where your data is residing, which technology, which users are actually going to use it, and why. So that level of data discovery is very, very important to make this a successful implementation. But back to you, Shankar.
Absolutely. Yeah. On that note, if I can just pull in Rohit. So Rohit, I think as a sector, real estate deals with a lot of third parties. So you have facility management, somebody to manage the visitors, prop tech, call centers, etc. Maybe 2 cents on what do they have to do in this complex environment to make sure they are taking care of personal data. That is the first part of it, Rohit. And one interesting question in our chat box is, what do we do about legacy data? So Rohit, if you could take that.
Sure. No, absolutely. Thank you so much for that. I think, most importantly, for any organization, especially real estate, I must say, because the sector itself doesn't function on its own, right? It's all having multiple layers, and of course, multiple third parties are involved in various stages. So, depending on what data the organization exposes beyond their, territory, that is where the crux is. So I think most of the times what we have to do is to very effectively form a third party risk management program, which is basically very clearly calling out what are your key critical vendors which deals with sensitive information, sensitive personal data, etc. If some of them hold your information in their ground, in their territory, that's even more riskier for us. And some of them process your information on your behalf. So I think it's basically tiering of third parties first of all, which are your critical, your high, medium, and low. You have to first tier them, and depending on the tier, you may have to perform assessments on those third parties on the frequency. So if you're a critical or a high, you may increase the frequency. You may perform a quarterly audit, etc., on those vendor which is having your critical information to assess and draw assurance that your data is being dealt with appropriately. And it can't be a mere third party attest SOC report which you can rely on and say that yeah, your controls are all fine. No, you need to really perform on yourself. There is much about re-performance of a third party audit which is required here when it comes to critical and sensitive vendors. At the same time, I would say for organization, they need to have a framework driven approach, right? So when it comes to framework driven approach, every organization would have their information security, cyber, data protection sort of a framework already in place. So how do you ensure your third party vendors are very much assessed as part of your framework? So that bit is to be covered from a overall perspective. Now coming to your second question on legacy information. So I think legacy information, of course, DPDPA says that you can hold on to all information that you need, provided there is a purpose. It's called purpose limitation. If you are meeting a particular purpose could be to meet a statute. Purpose is for any sort of legitimate interest that the business may have. It may be for certain business requirements. All of that, or maybe the consent is already there in your organization. You have taken the consent of that legacy information. If all of that exists, you can hold on to that information. Otherwise, if the purpose is met, you're just holding on to a 90-year-old data or 30-year-old data for no purpose. There is no requirement. DPDPA says, please purge that information. Okay. The second angle to it is that if there are certain data which you need to further hold for certain futuristic purposes, then especially PII, there is a concept of retrospective consent. What that means is for your pre-existing customers, you allow to send a consent, which is for future, saying that I hold your information. Can I use it for XYZ purposes? I plan to continue. Shall I continue or not? If you don't want me to, I'm happy to sort of purge it out. So that aspect is basically talking about a retrospective consent. Back to you.
Perfect. I think we have run through the questions in terms of what we have in the chat box and what we wanted to understand from the panel. Over to you, Chetan. Maybe a quick closing note. And if, we can also give a minute parallelly to people if they have any further questions to ask.
I think one of the question that I could read on the chat, and someone has posted it, and there are some of the gray areas where which are not very, very clear as to how a developer or any entity should look at, specifically on a lot of digital devices which are pretty common as far as facility management activities are concerned. There are photographs which are recording, there are CCTVs which are getting recorded through various facility managers, and all of that is getting stored somewhere or the other. Will it actually also classify as PII or digital data in DPDPA, and how one should look at protecting, Rohit? How about how is that being addressed?
Yeah. No, thanks for that question. I think it's a very pertinent question. And yes, it qualifies as PII, it qualifies as personal information, and it needs to be protected. So, depending on, for example, a facility, which let's say a DLF facility, somebody's just giving an example of DLF, somebody is approaching and the facility belongs to DLF, right? So, DLF is the fiduciary there. And then there is a CCTV recording. Most of the time, when you enter a premise, as per DPDPA, the Act says that you have to very clearly call out that this is a facility which is getting monitored. We will be collecting your information through a privacy notice, right? It has to be displayed to the the customer and very clearly mention that this is what we are going to use this for. We will be storing it for XYZ purposes, and then you may read our detailed guidelines, etc. Refer to our website policy and things like that. You don't need to very explicitly mention all of the details then and there, but the idea is to give a privacy notice whenever the person enters the facility or anything of that sort. And all your monitoring devices, could be CCTV, could be any other visitor log registers, and so on and so forth. All the and visitor registers are mostly avoided because it's analog in certain contexts, but eventually most of the time it gets digitized. So my suggestion is, please consider all the possible probable digital scenarios to be also considered when it comes to PII handling. And yes, this is how you to deal with it. So the responsibility ultimately lies with fiduciary, and it's what they have to take the steps that I just mentioned.
Just one last question, Rohit, and I think this is again very, very pertinent for developers who are targeting the set of customers who are actually non-resident Indians. Now, they typically may not reside in the boundaries of the country where DPDPA is applicable, and I think you touched upon that. How is it applicable on Indian citizens and companies who are based out of India? But there is a large set of demand that we as real estate developers would cater to the NRI segment of it. How do that come into the entire dynamics of DPDPA, and what should developers be looking at largely, or CIO should be looking at as far as NRI information is concerned?
Yeah, so I think DPDPA talks about PII processing. It doesn't segregate, who's PII, Indian citizen PII or US citizen PII. Any PII which gets collected and gets processed within Indian soil, which is for, goods and services provided for Indian jurisdiction, they have to abide by DPDPA. So any NRI customer, let's say a citizen of, let's say, Europe, is being processed in India, very much they have to protect it. They have to have encryption, all of those DPDPA requirements when it comes to PII handling. It has to be dealt with. So, and right from privacy notice to ensuring, reasonable safety and safeguards, your data security controls, your all the requirements, they have to follow the same, when it comes to that. But there is a different angle to it also, because when it comes to European citizen data, they also abide by GDPR, right? So, organizations who are into multiple geographies. So let's say a real estate organization who's not only in India, but in Europe, maybe in Singapore, maybe in Australia, maybe in Canada, like Heinz or any other organization, that eventually will have to look at multiple data protection laws and perform or maybe do an integrated sort of a privacy compliance adoption. So they may not only look at DPDPA, they may look at CCPA from California, they may look at a PIPDA from Canada, they may look at a GDPR from EU, and then use the GAPP, which we talked about, the generally accepted privacy principle, which sort of cuts across all of these, and then adopt it as a framework.
Sure, Rohit. I think we are at the end of this session, and I would thank all my fellow panelists in deliberating such an important topic. While real estate, as I said, data and technology has emerged strongly in this segment, but as a sector, we are still grappling with some of those challenges on how do we look at data and how do we harness the power of data, and bringing DPDPA into this entire scheme of things again complexes the entire environment of how do we assess the risk. I, being part of many boardroom discussions in the recent past, I think last 2-3 quarters, and I have seen the board discussions going in the right direction on how do we address, and this is a large animal to be addressed with. People are yes, people are scared. Yes, people are slightly unaware as to where do we start the journey. But as we said, this entire journey is kind of a building block. We will have to start with the foundation, as we say in the real estate term. The foundation has to be very very strong, and the foundation stone can only be set in with that level of data diagnostic and assessments to start with. Once we have identified where the data resides, where which all people are interacting with those set of data, including third parties and others, I think the larger battle is then to how do we tame that data and contain that data within the set sources. But identification as to which data, where these digital data are residing, is the first and the foremost step, and that's what we specialize in. But thank you all for participating in this. We have few certain questions still unanswered, but we will keep those questions and reply back to all of these participants. But if there are still any questions which you feel you need to address, you need answers to, please feel free to write us in. We will have a form coming in your mailbox after this session. Please feel free to bring whatever experiences, whatever questions that you have in mind. We will happy to schedule a one-on-one session with all of you to address some of these questions. But till then, it's the risk. It's the land of risk mitigation. Let's hope that all of us mitigate the risk that we are living with. Thank you for all joining in. Thank you, my fellow panelists.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Chetan. Thank you, everyone.